Today is part one of my colored pencil tutorial where I'm going to show you how I airbrushed the background for this piece and drew all of the detail on the hummingbirds. Hi, I'm Lisa, the artist behind Lachri Fine Art. In today's video, I am going to be working with Createx airbrush paint for the background. I will be using Winsor & Newton masking fluid and Frisket to block off my initial image to keep it clean while I'm airbrushing. I will have links to all the supplies I'm using below in the video description. The really good news for you guys on this one is the reference photos that I used on these hummingbirds. They were taken by an amazing artist, Christine, and she has allowed me to give you guys permission to use these too. So if you go to the link in the video description below to Patreon, I will have a post there. It's free to everybody. You don't have to be signed up to Patreon. That's where I will have these images available for you guys to download. So if you want to draw the hummingbirds, you are welcome to do so in your own artwork. Speaking of Patreon, if you are supporters, I do have the 2-hour version of this tutorial available for you now, so make sure you head over and check that out. And now onto this tutorial. Here you can see I have used Frisket and masking fluid to mask off my subject to protect it from the airbrush paint, which means I can be really messy as I paint with the airbrush because the areas under the masking fluid and Frisket are going to be completely clean, completely white, won't be messed up at all. I do have a video showing you exactly how I use that. I'll have a card pop up so you can check that out if you're unfamiliar with those products. What I'm doing is just slowly layering up this blurry fuzzy background, and the great thing about this is this technique you do not have to have ever used an airbrush before to make this work really well, because you're not trying to do detail. You just want something very out of focus, very fuzzy. I don't want my airbrush super close to the paper because that would create detail that I don't want. So I'm just keeping my airbrush at a distance to keep everything soft and just layering one color over another until I get the look that I want. Now there are times, because I do mix water in with my Createx airbrush paint, sometimes I get it a little bit too thin down, and so the paint can start to run. So be careful of that. If it starts to run, just add more paint, less water for the mixture. For me, I don't use the paint straight because it's just too thick. It doesn't feed through my airbrush well. So I just thin that down a little bit with water. And because I have everything taped down around the edges, if the paper starts to buckle or warp, when I use the hairdryer on it and it dries, it will dry completely back into shape. Now I am using a circle template to make sure that I've got nice circles for that background. I just used my white paint to get those circles. And now I've glazed over or lightly airbrushed over some translucent greenish yellow colors just to add a bit more depth so it's not just flat white circles. Moving on to the hummingbird, this guy I did do as a live stream, so you can watch in real time how I draw his head and part of his body. I will have a card pop up so you can check that out. But what I'm doing is blocking in the general shape and direction that these little feathers are going to go. I'm using brown pencils with a little bit of black, mostly brown though. I need to make sure that my pencil stays very sharp and just slowly build up, starting to add in my green there. And I want to get most of my detailing in there. And then I will blend out with odorless mineral spirits. You can see it makes it look really soft and fuzzy. While that dries, I'm going to go ahead and sketch in the approximate shape of the feathers on the body. I don't need them to be perfect. I need them to be close. I need to make sure that his eye and his beak, his larger feathers, those all need to be in the right location. But if some of my feathers are a little bit off, I'm not going to stress about it. I'm not going to spend an extra 8 hours to make sure everything's exactly right. What I do want to watch is that the feathers are going in the right direction. They're the right size, the right shape, that they're curving where they need to curve. That is the sort of thing that is going to make your work look very realistic. You can copy every exact line if you want to. I don't think it's necessary as long as you can capture that texture. So as I move through here, you can see I'm just going to keep layering, keep building until I get the detail where I want it. I'm adding a little bit of this reddish color in here. Now, I use black a lot, and you'll hear where artists will say, or they've been told, don't ever use black. Don't use black paint, don't use black pencils. I love black, but I don't leave black straight black. I will always layer another color over it so that it doesn't look flat black. I get a lot of depth that way. But using the actual black colors, that will make me get the darks as dark as I want them very quickly versus just slowly building up with the reds and blues and purples to get black the way that a lot of artists will suggest. I'm a huge fan of black, just layer some other colors into it. So I'm starting to build up the shape of these feathers on the body here. You want to make sure when you're blending out with odorless mineral spirits that you are letting it dry in between layers. Otherwise, you can damage the tooth of your paper if you work the pencil over wet paper. Just let that dry all the way, and it normally, depending on the type of paper that you're using, it may take 30 seconds, it may take 5 minutes. Stonehenge, for example, is very absorbent, so that takes a little bit longer to dry, but normally it does not take very long. As long as you're not using a ton of it. If you're oversaturating your brush, then yeah, it may take longer for it to dry. Again, just watching that reference photo, copying the direction of the feathers here. Slowly building up. Now this guy's he's got a lot of very sketchy feathers. He's somewhat fluffed up, so I want to make sure that I capture that look where the feathers are just kind of going every which direction here. He's not really smooth and sleek like the other two hummingbirds will be, just because he is all fluffed up. So I am going to have a lot more shadow in between all of these feathers than what you're going to see on the other two birds. Using some of those greens, I'm using greens and yellows to get the color of his feathers there. Blended that out with the Mona Lisa odorless paint thinner, which you can see it just kind of smudged everything together, and it completely covers the tooth of the paper, so I don't have any bits of white showing through. And this also allows me to work in very, very light layers, but still get full color saturation. So I'm never damaging the tooth of my paper because I don't have to push hard. Now this next bit is one of my favorite techniques for colored pencil right now. I am mixing touch-up texture with titanium white colored pencil from brushandpencil.com. I will have a card pop up so you can see exactly how I'm making that mixture. And I'm painting it on with a number 2 synthetic hog-haired lighter brush. And this gets such great fine details. And the nice thing is, because this has the touch-up texture mixed into it, that basically means I'm adding tooth back to my paper. So anywhere where I do this, if I want to tint the color yellow, I just want it to be a brighter yellow, but that bright yellow isn't showing up against my darker colors, I can put this on there first, and when I go over it with the yellow will be nice and bright on top of the white here. And you can just get these nice, beautiful, fine details by painting it on. And this is a product that is made specifically for colored pencil. It is the only one of its kind. There are no other methods. I know some people will use gel pens and stuff like that, acrylic paint. There is not a single other method of adding white lines like this on colored pencil that I personally recommend, because they're not made for colored pencil, so you can run into archival issues with gel pens and with a lot of these other products. This one is specifically for colored pencil, and so when you mix those two together, you can get just beautiful white lines that are just as good as it would be with a gel pen, only you actually, I think it's a little bit better because you have more control using a paintbrush. So now that that's on there, I let it dry completely. It only takes a couple of minutes, and then I'm going in between and sharpening up my contrast, making the feathers a little bit darker in the deepest portions of the shadows, just little details here and there. So now I'm going to move on to this guy, starting with that eye, and you can see I started with black and then I layered another reddish color over the eye. I'm not leaving any areas straight black. Adding some of these brighter green colors first. And again, just making sure I follow the direction of the feathers. Now, the one really great thing to watch on this, look how bad this looks for like the first half of drawing this bird. It looks like something that a child had drawn or someone who's very, very new to colored pencils. If your work looks like this and you're thinking, I don't know how to make it look realistic, this is as good as I'm able to get it, notice that mine looks this way too. It's just part of the process. So often, one of the biggest mistakes that I see people making when they're trying to get realism, but they're having a hard time accomplishing that, is that they're calling the work finished too soon. This stage where it's very fuzzy, it looks like crayon, it's not wrong. It's not bad. It's just not finished. And that is one of the biggest mistakes that I will see people who are going for realism make, is that they're calling their work finished too soon. If that's the look that you want, that's fine. You can go ahead and leave it that way. But if this is not your goal, if you're trying to get it to look more realistic and you're having trouble, chances are you just need more layers. You just need to continuously build and work on it a lot longer than whatever amount of time you're currently spending on it. Colored pencil is a very slow medium. That's something to just be aware of. These videos make it appear like it's super, super fast. It's not. This is one of the slowest mediums you can work in because you're working with just that teeny, teeny, tiny brush tip to try to fill in large areas. there. I've blended out with the odorless mineral spirits. Now look how dull this looks. There is no detail. There's no definition anywhere. It just looks kind of like a blob. So watch though as I continue to build up, continue layering. Now my pencil does need to be very sharp for these fine details. That's another mistake that I will often see artists make when they're trying to get fine details, is that their pencils just aren't really sharp enough. Make sure that you're keeping those super sharp. And the polychromos that I'm using here are just so perfect for fine detail because they are a very hard lead. They sharpen to a very, very fine point and they hold that point very well. So it's a lot easier to get some of the finer detail with those than any of the other pencils that I've used. And on this piece, I'm mixing luminance, which are my wax-based pencil. They're going to be more opaque, and I'm mixing the polychromos, which are my oil-based, my harder leaded pencils. So they're going to be easier for the fine details. And I just go back and forth between the two depending on the look that I'm going for. Sometimes that's determined by the color. That bright green I did on the bird on his head, that there is just not another color quite that bright in polychromo. So I'm going to go with my luminance there. Now for other areas where I'm trying to blend very smoothly, like if I'm doing a portrait with skin, then I like my luminance better because they do blend so smoothly. It just depends on what I'm working on. So I'm starting to build up these feathers here, making sure that I'm following the direction of these little clumps and clusters of feathers. I'm not just putting random lines anywhere. This is very controlled. I'm really watching that reference photo. And again, if you guys want to paint these little hummingbirds or draw them, the photographer Christine has given us permission, and I will have a link to Patreon where I've uploaded these. They're available to everybody. You do not have to be signed up for Patreon to grab these, but you can head over there and download these if you want to draw the hummingbirds yourself. She's given us permission to use that in our own work. So just refining details. Again, this is still very fuzzy. This isn't very realistic yet. That's okay. It's not that it's wrong, it's that it's not finished. Building up some contrast. Now, when I use the masking fluid and frisk it, when I block things up off and airbrush, sometimes I don't have that masking fluid in the exact right place. In this case, his beak was slightly shaped wrong. I had it too thick. It's not a big deal. The colored pencil, I just blend a color that's similar to my background over it, and you can't even tell when looking at it that those are two different mediums. That's one of the reasons that I like using Createx so much when I'm going to be using colored pencil over it or next to it, because they blend together seamlessly. They both have a very similar finish, so it doesn't look like mixed media. And there's nothing wrong with that if that's your goal. In my case, I just like how these two blend seamlessly. So again, look how sharp that pencil is. Just slowly building more and more detail. Now on all of these spots, these little speckles that you're seeing me paint in here or draw in here, I'm not making them one solid color. Some of them are a reddish color and then the centers have a little bit of brown inside of it. When you're working with colored pencil, try to layer lots of different colors. Let one color blend into another. Nothing is just one solid color or putting the right color in the right place. If you want things to look realistic, to look very natural and not like a, I guess, high definition paint by number, let your colors overlap. When you want your feathers or hair or fur to look natural and to look soft and not like a wax drawing, which you'll sometimes see with colored pencil, you want to let these overlap. Let them blend into each other. You're going to get a much more natural look there than just trying to put the right color in the right place every time. Now you saw just a second ago, I added a bit of blue onto the shaded area. Now I'm going to leave him alone for a bit. He's not finished. I'm going to come back through with that touch-up texture and colored pencil titanium white mixture and paint in highlights on him. But I'm going to get this next little bird, now that I'm actually have the camera on him, but I'm going to get this next little bird blocked in and brought up to the same stage or level of completion as the other hummingbird. That way I can use the touch-up texture titanium white together. I only have to mix one batch. That stuff doesn't really save. Once you mix up a batch, it dries fairly quickly. So it's a lot better to have an area like this where I know I'm going to use it on both these birds. I'm going to get both these birds to the same stage so that I can use it at the same time on both of them, versus mix a batch, work on one bird, and then in 30 minutes need to mix a second batch because the first batch dried. Just work on it all together whenever possible. Sketching in that tail there, which looks very messy, blending that out with my odorless mineral spirits. Adding a few little details on the other one with some white. And I will jump back and forth between these two because as I work, I'll constantly see the other hummingbird and notice little details that need to be adjusted. Even the first hummingbird. As I'm working on leaves, as at the time that I'm recording this video, I'm finishing the leaves for next week's video, and I still keep coming back up to these hummingbirds and adding little details. So I'm using my luminance white to add some of the details, some of the highlights on these birds. The areas that I'm going to need to be bright white, I will save that for the texture, touch-up texture and titanium white mixture that I'm going to paint on. But I'm going to do as much of this as possible with just the colored pencil so that I keep that softness. I don't want it to be too harsh. Now I'm going to go ahead and come through here and blend in or paint in the white highlights. And again, if I go too harsh, it's not that big of a deal. I can go over that with colored pencil. That's the great thing with this. If you do that with a gel pen, they tend to run and smear and smudge or flake off. There can be a lot of problems depending on the formula. Not so archival with this. It's made for this. And I sound like a salesperson, and it's just because I'm so excited about this product. I'm not getting a commission or anything. If you guys buy it, it doesn't make any actual difference to me. It's just one of those things that has made such a difference in my own work and how I work in colored pencil and the things that I'm able to do with it now that I just have to tell everybody about it because it's so amazing. Now, when I put the clumps and clusters of the feathers, notice that they are clumps and clusters. It's not just little confetti lines all over the place. Anytime you're drawing feathers or fur or hair, it's not random. There's no random lines all over the place. They are going to be grouped into clumps and clusters. That will make it look much more realistic than random lines everywhere. You can see I'm layering a lot of colors over where I had painted on that touch-up texture now that it's dry. Taking more of that blue into the shadow there, adding some of that onto the first hummingbird as well. I don't want to add a color to one hummingbird and not have it on the other. So you'll see where I jump around where I'm suddenly using one color on all three birds. I've got to make it look like they're all coming from the same light or they've got the same light sources. So the colors that are reflecting on one bird should be reflecting on the other as well. In that case, that's where I wanted to take that blue pencil and make sure I had that color in all three birds. So that is it for these guys. There is where I am right now. I will have all of these leaves finished next week. Next week's video, we will be focusing just on the leaves and berries. I do have the live streams available. I will have links in the video description. So if you want to see what I've worked on so far on this piece live, that will be available for you. And don't forget to head over and download the reference photo for these hummingbirds so you can draw them yourself. So I'm recording this video and I randomly realized I'm hungry. I am actually going to text my husband to bring home food. And this conversation will likely go how it does every single time I ask him to go by the grocery store. I will text that I'm hungry. He will respond, "What sounds good?" I will say anything, whatever you want to eat. No, you tell me. This is a conversation that pretty much happens every time I ask him to pick me up food. I'm just hungry. I don't really care what it is. He knows what I like, and he expects me to give specifics. I, however, have no decision-making skills, so asking me what I want to eat is a horrible idea. My stomach is growling. Can you hear that? I really am hungry. Oh, I haven't eaten since breakfast, and it's like 11 o'clock at night. You're not leaving me already, are you? Did you hit the subscribe button? I mean, if you already hit the subscribe button, then you can go ahead and leave. But if you didn't, we just have to sit here and stare at each other awkwardly until you do. It'd just be way less awkward if you hit the subscribe button. It is your only way out. Okay, I've only got 20 seconds that I can do this and then YouTube cuts me off.